lockdown. I am so delighted to be joined by Veronica Lysaght today, a top coach, and we're going to be talking about a very interesting idea in a moment, which is the idea of using this great pause, as it's been called, to capture the life story of our parents or our maybe elderly loved ones. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Just to say that Psychologies magazine is running live broadcasts throughout the weekday at 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. most days, where we're talking to coaches, experts, and all the people that can support you through this strange time that we're all going through at the moment. We want to feel like we're supporting the mental health of the nation. And again, I'm delighted to be joined by you today, Veronica. Really lovely to see your face. I was so enthused by your idea the other day that I said, "Oh my goodness, we've got to talk about this." So, tell us about the idea that you had and what you set up 40 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Susie. And it's a delight to be here. I think if we can make some time and have some good come out of this great pause, then we're off. That's exciting.
Right.
So what I set up a long time ago was actually about 25 years ago. I had a number of losses, and the three in a row, as things comes in threes, and the third one was the death of my brother. So I ended up going to the local hospice, who, in a conversation with the local hospice, I came up with the idea of offering a biography service. So basically, for those people who were dying at the time, how do you go about capturing their stories? Because I fundamentally believe that everybody needs to be respected and to be listened to. And this is a way of capturing the stories of those that we love. In the case of the hospice, it was people that I didn't know, but I gathered together some people around me to assist. We made sure the ethics were okay. 25 years in advance, as a good bunch of coaches and counsellors, we sorted out the confidentiality issues. And then we went forward to basically record people's stories and then write them up and then have those people edit their stories so that they owned them. Every word that was on the paper that we made into a little booklet was theirs. They chose photos that they added to them. And you had this document, this book, that was available for anybody to take a look at and for them to distribute who they wanted to distribute it to. Now it would be all electronic and much easier, technically. And the idea is still there that we capture the stories of those people who we love. Yesterday I put the blog that we did up on my Facebook page, and a friend came back to me and said, "How do I start that conversation with my father without implying that he is close to death?" and and I said, well, maybe it's about just being curious, that you have your own children, and as you have your own children, you're looking at how could you be curious about what your parents' childhood was like. So it's just a starting point to take the time to listen and hear a different point of view maybe than you normally do from a parent or an aunt or a loved one or even somebody you don't know.
I mean, I was so taken by the idea when you mentioned it to me this week. And for me, I think I lost my parents when I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of, and I'm 50 now, so it's over 35 years ago when I lost my parents. And the idea of having a book or a kind of a document that I could now give to a son to say, this is what your father did and this is how he lived his life. It would be absolutely incredible. And I think this is not, I mean, I know that you were working in hospices, but I feel like this great pause is an opportunity. If you are not one of the emergency services and the key workers who are working out there, thank you. But if you are at home and you are separated from your parents or your elderly aunts or whoever they may be, this is a perfect opportunity to start a conversation and to start recording things. I mean, you talk about doing writing, but I think in the day of Zoom and video and YouTube, you could probably do videos with people. If people didn't want to do actually the written word.
Absolutely. And you could just record it as a podcast, essentially just record it as well. So I think that's one of the things that you can decide with the person that you're talking to
Yeah,
is how shall we record it? What is it that we want to achieve? What is it that we want it to look like in the end? You know,
yeah,
that's a negotiation. And I think what's fundamental to me is that the ownership of this is with the person whose story it is. So if they want to do a video, do a video. If they want to do audio, you know, and or written, it's their choice. And Susie, look, I really relate to what you were saying about having lost your parents. I lost my mother when I had just turned 17.
yeah,
And now, you know, my 50s, I also would have liked to have known who she was, what her thinking was, you know, what her politics was, what she would have thought of this.
yeah.
You know, it's the kind of getting somebody else's stories and their opinions that seems to be bringing them more to life, even though they have passed away.
Sure. I mean, what I love as well. I mean, I think it was an interesting question that you said at the beginning is how do people, how do you bring it up with your relatives
Mm.
without sounding like, oh, you're on your last legs? But I think it's more about, as you say, this is an opportunity to connect at a deeper level
Mm.
with with the people that you had. So tell the story about. So this was an idea with you and another coach, Neil Scotton. And
Yes.
tell us the story about him and his father, which really captured my attention.
So, Neil, I hope you don't mind me taking your story and repeating it here. But essentially, Neil had his father was unwell, and then he kind of had a wake up call that it would be good to be able to know his father's story. So he simply started to record it, and the in doing that, there were a couple of spin-offs of that. It took their relationship. Firstly, they must have had a good relationship to be able to do that recording or to capture that. And then Neil said that it takes their relationship from being more surface, but to having more depth and more equality in the relationship, because you're getting to know that person as an adult, rather than getting to know them as my father. I think it takes a certain amount of age to be able to do that. And yet, when I have also found that sometimes it's quite useful if it's not parent to child, if it's grandparent to child, that sometimes is more useful because the parent won't say, "Oh, but you know that." Oh, but you know that, we did this. So there's no assumed knowledge. And there's an advantage in maybe having a discussion about, well, I may know I may know that, but that's not the story. The story is your story. How do you bring that out?
Yeah.
One of the things is a bit to act like a journalist. As a journalist, when you go into a situation, you assume nothing because you don't know much about it. So your job is to find out and to do that in a way that's gentle and respectful and acknowledges the story that that person wants to tell.
So, I mean, you're getting into the kind of the how of it, and I know that on the Life Labs blog, when the details are below around the how, some top tips, so people can read it there. But also, so you talk about with a journalist, but I also think, I mean, I'm a journalist and I'm a coach, and
Mm,
you're a journalist and you're a coach. I
mm,
think there's a piece around creating an unconditional space for people that is unjudgmental
yes.
and, as you said earlier, curious. So you sort of
Mm,
set up the space. How do we do that in a kind of safe way? Because I think often we get very trapped in certain roles,
yeah.
of, mum's like that, dad's like that, Uncle Jim's like that, and
Mm.
I'm this kind of person, and da da da. How do we sort of say, let's just have a blank page, and how do we set it up properly?
I think that the setting up um, comes from owning your curiosity about your parent. And maybe it comes from stating, look, I don't know this. I don't know. Or more, I want to know more about you. And maybe just owning, I don't remember. You may have told me, mum or dad, this story, but I don't remember all of the details. And I'd really like to capture that so that I can refer to it in the future, or other members of the family can refer to it in the future. I think it's having the courage. to have an open conversation with your parents about saying, can we just set that aside for half an hour and record something for half an hour? I think that it doesn't have to be long. Many people, it's quite intense to ask somebody their story, and you will get some people who will talk for a long time and do it really well, and there will be others who will talk for a little bit and then stop, and then you'll need to kind of keep prompting them. So it's to say, can we do lots of smaller amounts, so it doesn't seem too onerous to the person who's been asked to tell their story. It's also allows for some reflection time. If you've listened to your mum or your dad or your aunt or your uncle or whoever for half an hour, and you're starting to follow those threads and those questions, next time you get together, maybe the next day or the next week you get together, there'll be topics that have arisen in the meantime about, oh, I forgot to tell you about this, and did you know about great aunt so and so?
Yeah.
So it's gathering all of those things together and being open, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think the open and curious is really important. But again, as you're talking, I could feel my heart kind of really leaping, because this idea of being able to connect with 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 someone who we are disconnected at the moment physically, and it literally breaks my heart. My friends are not being able to see their parents, and it might go on
Yeah.
for a long time. So this
Mm.
sounds like a brilliant idea of being able to disconnect at such a deep level with our parents. I love it. I love it. I love it. So
And and Susie, I don't know about you, but I'm sick of talking to my loved ones and the topic of conversation is coronavirus. Oh, for goodness sakes, can't we talk about something else? And this,
yeah,
this and this is a yes, we can talk about something else, and let's make our time together joyous.
yeah.
Instead of it being about the news or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe you could also build into that whole idea of, so the kind of questions that we're going to ask, we're going to just move on to that in a minute, but it's how did you cope with, I mean, for many of our parents or our grandparents might have been in the war.
Mm,
And I remember asking my grandfather about that, and
mm.
he literally came home, and his house in London had been bombed, and his mother had been killed, and
Oh my goodness.
he was only young. And I remember just thinking, how are you still standing after that
Mm,
story? I was so kind of moved by that,
yes.
and I often think about that story, because I think, my God, that's he survived that and went on to create a flourishing life with children and happiness despite that kind of horror that he lived through. So maybe those resilience stories would be, maybe a good place to start. So how do we start? What kind of questions should we start asking?
Well, um, we could start at the beginning. Tell me, I'm okay, so you were born in London in this year. What was your childhood like? You know, what
Yeah,
was that like? I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, and I remember once um, my father and I were doing a very boring job that required the two of us to walk along a paddock, and I asked Dad about his childhood. Now, off he went, and it was absolutely lovely. And because his father died when he was 10. So, what was that like for you, Dad? You may already know some of the important things of their life. So, it could be referring to them. I mean, you could be asking, in your case, what was that like for you when you returned from war and your parent was dead and your home was bombed? How did you cope? What did you do? So I would start at childhood, and some of those questions are, um, what was it like for you at this time? What else was happening around here? So it could be that you're or even what's your earliest memory? Who were
yeah,
your friends from your school days?
yeah,
You went to school. Oh gosh, that was a strict religious school. What was that like? Or your knowledge, because of the relationship that you have, may actually be able to build what I would call a richer description into the story, because you will have snippets of information, and it's asking them to expand on that.
yeah, yeah. Um, as journalists, we know the kind of basic rules, which is ask open questions, which is what,
Mm,
how, when, why. Are there any other kind of rules that could help people in their interview skills? We're bringing the curiosity to it,
Yes.
ask open questions, but are there any don'ts that we shouldn't be doing?
I would be wary of why, because why, when it's asked, it could be, why did you do that? It can sound a little defensive. So my tip would be, what helped you make that decision, or what was going on that was a decision that you made, just to soften that a little. So I'd just be a little bit wary of why. Um, Another tip would be to, if somebody tells you that something was happening in 1948, for example, just have a mental thinking, well, that was only a few years after the war ended. So what was it like in the broader historical context? Try to bring those things in as well. Did you still have rationing? Um, you got married in 1946. So uh, how did you find fabric for a wedding dress? Or what was it like to be married in uniform? Or whatever it was. So it's the I'm using my hands here, but it's kind of bringing in the information that is from the whole surroundings into this conversation as well, because you may have a bit of an idea of what was happening in the context. Um, so don'ts, I would say a bit about the why, and the don't is, don't take anything personally. If it is they are telling their story, and if there is something in there that makes you bristle and you think, that was a reference to me and I didn't really like it, just try and set it aside, because actually this is their story, and it's not about you for this meantime. You can discuss it later, but at here and now, this is about their story.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing, it's about their story and really listening. I mean, what we're wanting to do is to really hear things perhaps that we've never heard before, and to
Mm,
capture that for going forward, for your children, for their children's children. And I just think as a project, to an ongoing project that you could, set up with your parents or with someone that you love. And it doesn't even have to be an older person. I mean,
no.
maybe it's as you say, you did it with um with your brother, or how can you do it with people around you that you just want to capture? It's maybe someone you admire, or be inspired by.
Mm,
That may be
mm.
something to do as well. So go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I have in my head at the moment, I want to do this with a very good friend of mine. He's in no risk of dying. He's absolutely fine. And he is a very wise person. So I want to be able to capture a little bit of what his life was. What is it that makes him so special? What is it that makes him to be able to lead with such ease? There's a curiosity in me about how did he manage to get to that point in that position? What triggers? What's happened in his life that's allowed him to be the wonderful person that he is? Yeah, so I'm totally with you. And wouldn't it be fun if it was the parents interviewing the children about what's your life? What was your childhood like? And then sitting back and listening to that from the child's perspective of what their childhood was like. That would be a topic for conversation.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. The other thing is, I think, oh my goodness, what there may be a kind of a piece there around. It might bring up stuff, old what hurts. What do we? Again, I think it's important that this is not about trying to sort out past hurts, but it's
No.
more about listening
Hmm.
and documenting and recording. Um,
Yeah, I totally agree. This is not therapy,
yeah,
and there is no intent for it to be therapy. So it is a listening. Neil has a lovely phrase which is "listen to till your ears bleed," and and I think that that's what it's about. It's just to listen and to hold the presence and to be solid enough in yourself that you can allow the other person's story to come out in the way they want it to come out.
Yeah, that's lovely. So thank you so much for your time today, Veronica. I am so inspired by this idea. I mean, so what we're just doing, it's just an idea that we've had, and then we're putting it out there. You know, there's Veronica's blog on the details below. Veronica and Neil are two coaches. If you want to get some advice from them or anything around this project, then just email them direct. Which thank you very much for that. But
And
go on.
well, and if there's enough interest, we'd be happy to run some online training about it if people would like us to do that. So,
Yeah.
if you're interested, then drop us an email, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, what we wanted to do was I just was so inspired by this idea that I wanted to put it out there onto our Psychologies network, because we have such an amazing community of people. And I just thought this is such a brilliant idea that you could do with your parents or your elderly relatives in this kind of, when we've just got some time to do this. And rather
Yes.
than being worried about them, it's a really amazing, amazing way to connect. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing this idea to me, Veronica, and thank you so much for your time today. Lots of love and
Thank
have
you,
a
Susie.
wonderful day.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you to all those who are listening and partaking. I'd love to hear from you, and let's make it happen.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.